we have the pleasure of talking with Miss Ivory Long. Um, I won't give her too much of her background, but I will tell you this. I had to ask her on because when I was rewriting the book, The Parents Blueprint for Athletic Scholarships, she was extremely great resource for me in terms of polishing that up and changing that and helping. And when I was building out the course and all those things for it, she was a pivotal component in making that go the way it wanted. So I wanted to make sure she came on here to share her expertise with you all about NCAA and getting all the other good stuff involved there. So make sure you have a head start there. So welcome, Miss Ivory, to the podcast.
Thank y'all for having me. My name's Ivory Long, and I am the Assistant Director of Outreach and Strategic Partnerships for the NCAA Eligibility Center. Just a little bit about my background. I am a former D2 student athlete. I ran track and field at the University of Indianapolis. I'm also a former high school teacher at Pike High School and high school track and field coach. I coached my first 5 years at North Central High School and then the last 12 at Pike High School. So it's crazy that it's been 17 years, insane. But now I have pivoted my career and I work at the NCAA where I get to educate high school counselors, student athletes, coaches, athletic directors on the initial eligibility process and what they need in order to compete at the next level.
Nice.
So, how do you feel your experiences as a coach influence your work at the NCAA?
A lot. It influences a lot because it gives me the opportunity to connect not with only high school student athletes, but also high school coaches. I am able to, relate to those student athletes and families when they come to our events, or if I go to a school and do a presentation and they ask questions, I'm able to help navigate them, especially with who to talk to. Sometimes they'll say, like, I had no idea this process even existed. And so being able to help navigate them with the resources, like speaking to your school counselor, making sure you're checking in not only with your coach on the athletic side, but knowing who to talk to from the academic side as well.
Now, is that knowing who to talk to from the academic side? Is that their school, or is that when they start getting recruited, academically you may want to be looking at when it comes to college?
Yeah, so at their school, so we at the Eligibility Center, we work in the pre-enrollment space. So we work directly with high school student athletes. So when it comes to, being eligible to compete at an NCAA Division One, two, or three school, yes, you have to have the athletic ability, but you also have to have the academic aspect and piece as well. So, 9 times out of 10, if it's talking about sports or wanting to play college sports, they're going to go to their coach or their athletic director, whether that's their high school coach, maybe their club or AAU coach. But there is another piece of the puzzle that student athletes really don't understand, and that is the academic piece. And their high school counselor is the ones that's going to make sure that they're registered for the right courses, make sure that they're on track from an academic eligibility standpoint, because before you can even play or compete at that college or university, you have to apply and be admitted. So you have to meet the requirements of that college or university. And then also, once you get to college, you have to meet progress towards degree. So from an academic standpoint, you still have to meet certain academic requirements to stay eligible.
Oh, wow.
So that's a lot, right? And for a lot of people listening and viewing this, they're probably like, one, they're athletes or they have kids who are athletes, and they're like, eligibility, what are you talking about? So can you kind of walk us through what that means, especially for those who are kind of they're new to this, what that means, and maybe some misconceptions about what eligibility for college looks like and how they need to prepare in high school?
Yeah, so there are three different requirements that student athletes have to meet. We'll start there. The first one is they have to graduate high school. So they have to meet the graduation requirements of their high school. But where it can kind of get confusing and overwhelming is that in addition to their high school requirements, they have to meet the requirements of the eligibility center. The eligibility center requirements are different from their high school requirements. So with the eligibility, one, they have to be registered with the eligibility center. From an academic standpoint, they have to complete 16 core courses. So when we look at their transcript, we are only looking at their core courses. So math, English, science, social studies, world language courses. We don't look at their elective courses. They have to have a certain GPA. So in order to be eligible from an NCAA standpoint, they have to have at least a 2.3 core GPA. So one of the differences is, at the eligibility center, we're looking at their GPA in their core classes. When they are applying to these colleges, say for instance, they're applying to compete at IU. IU may have an admission requirement that you have to have at least maybe a 3.0 GPA. We're just going to throw a number out there. That is their overall GPA. So that is in combination of core courses and elective courses. At the eligibility center, when we look at their transcript, we're only looking at their GPA in their core courses. So when we're at these events and they see 2.3, that's all they see. They're like, oh, I got a 2.3, that's easy. But then when we explain to them, that's not a 2.3 overall GPA. That's only a 2.3 in your core courses. So you could have, say, a 2.9 or 3.0 overall GPA, but in those core courses, you might have a 2.0. You might have a 1.9, and that would deem you ineligible to become a qualifier at a Division I and Division II school. So one of the misconceptions that I see is that sometimes when student athletes are offered athletic scholarships, so if they have a college coach that's interested in them and they want to offer them a scholarship, they think that that's all it takes. Like, I have, the athletic ability, this coach is interested in me, I'm fine. But then they don't understand the academic piece. Like you have to be eligible from an academic standpoint. So I always say, when I go present, I have them, finish my sentence and I say, you are an athlete first or a student first and then the athlete second. And it's so true because when you are going through the recruiting process, your athletic ability is what attracts that coach to you. They know you can play. They seen you in a game or a meet, or, maybe they seen some film on you somewhere, or maybe it's word of mouth, but it's your academic performance that's going to get you to that school and help you continue to compete at that school. And so they don't understand that the same amount of intensity that they put into their sport or sports is the same intensity that they need to put in the classroom. And their academics can also help in the recruiting process too. If you have a college coach that's maybe interested in two student athletes and athletically they look the same on paper, right? So maybe, you have a student athlete who runs 100 from Pike and a student athlete who runs 100 at North Central. Athletically, on paper, they're the same. They run similar times. They have similar marks in other areas as well. Like maybe they run the 200 or they long jump. But outside of the athletic piece, how is that student athlete going to make themselves stand out for that coach to say, okay, I am the one that you want to recruit? Because maybe that coach only has one scholarship or one roster spot. So how are you going to differentiate yourself from all of the other student athletes that coach is recruiting? And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be your grades. Because again, if I'm a coach and I'm recruiting you, I know you can run, I know you can jump, I know you can, catch a ball. The first question I'm going to ask that coach, that high school coach, or that school counselor is, how are their grades?
Right.
I have two parts thing here. One, I wanted to say the academics part is important, and in terms of opening doors, I think it takes you as an athlete. I think it gives you more options, right?
Right.
So if your academics are super tight, guess what? You have a whole tier of schools that you're eligible for now. Like you're eligible for your Northwesterns and your Vanderbilts and your Stanfords and your University of Chicago's and your UCLA's. You're eligible for those because you have the academic wherewithal to meet those standards. So that's first. Second, I wanted to ask, is there a way for people to keep up with to kind of have an idea what their core GPA is? Like, is there a calculator somewhere where they can be like, okay, I know I got this in my English and this in world history, and is there a way for them to keep up with that? Because I know there's that misnomer of, oh, my GPA is solid, but the rest of it is trash.
Exaggerate, stretch the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if a student athlete, family member, if you go online, go to Google, type in NCAA GPA calculator, we have a digital GPA calculator. So you can plug in your core courses. You can plug in what grade you got, how many points there are, and then it'll calculate your core GPA. You can also, student athletes, talk to your school counselor. One of the first questions I ask when I go present to student athletes or talk to student athletes is, how many of you know who your school counselor is? And when I say, if I have a room of 150 student athletes, maybe 10 raise their hand. And so, one, first and foremost, knowing who that school counselor is, and then communicating that you want to play at the next level or interested. Maybe, you're on the fence, but communicating that interest so then they can help you, one, start taking the right courses, and then two, helping you stay on track and helping you with things like calculating your core GPA.
And something else I thought you said that was pretty interesting was the component about making sure you have to be able to be accepted into that school. Because I know I'm not aging myself, but back in my day, I never saw an application. It was they want me, and I did nothing. I showed up. I mean, I just went to the bookstore, picked up my books, talked to the counselor about what I thought I wanted to major in, and boom, 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 my classes was set. Everything was built out for me. But now you're saying the kids have to actually apply to the school and be accepted to the school, and that's a different experience altogether because you're just like every other student now. You're just bidding for a few dollars, or more than a few dollars, but you're bidding for dollars to make sure you get accepted.
Right. And so I think you just had a great support system that did everything behind the scenes for you because um, but yeah, so in order to compete, so say for instance, during my process, I had, in order to compete at University of Indianapolis, I had to be admitted into that college or university. I have personally seen student athletes who were getting recruited by schools, and then, they apply to that school and don't get in. So if you don't get in, you can't compete for that school. And so either you have to take another route. So maybe, that's the school you really want to go to. And maybe the coach is like, okay, let's take another route. Maybe you have to go to junior college for 2 years and then transfer. Or, some student athletes may sit out a year and then, try again. But you do have to apply and be admitted. There's one main question that I get a lot from parents and student athletes in schools too is, does my student athlete have to take the SAT or ACT? And prior to, and I'm going to age myself too, when I went through the process, yes, we had, in order, when I did, it was the clearinghouse back when I went through it, but it was the NCAA clearinghouse. Now we're the eligibility center. But I had to take the SAT and ACT scores, and I had to submit those to the NCAA. During COVID, the NCAA took a pause, as did most colleges, of, not requiring SAT or ACT scores given the circumstances. But as of January of 2023, the NCAA made that a permanent thing. So from an NCAA eligibility standpoint, no, student athletes no longer have to submit SAT and ACT scores to be eligible from the NCAA. However, some colleges and universities still require them to be admitted. And so that's why I tell student athletes, like, this is your journey. You have your family, you have your coaches, your athletic directors, your counselors as a support system, but we want them to have a seat in this, this whole experience, because they're the ones that's going to be spending the next 4 to 5 years of their collegiate career at this school. So they can go on these colleges' websites. So if a college is recruiting you, or if you're interested in a college, see what the admission requirements are. See what the GPA requirement is. See if you have to have a SAT or ACT test score submitted, because some schools require it, some schools don't, and some schools are test optional. So, and if you're unsure, there are numbers found on these websites where you can contact the admissions, office. If you are getting recruited, reach out to the college coach to see, hey, like, what all do I need in order to, apply and be admitted into this school? So just being knowledgeable and knowing where to go, I think, is one of the major things in this process. When I talk to student athletes and families, a lot of them are like, I had no idea this was even a process, because maybe, this is the first student athlete in their family having the opportunity to be a collegiate athlete, or maybe some things have changed from when the parents or guardians have went through the process, or maybe they had an older sibling who went through the process, and maybe some things have changed. And so I just, being aware of the process, but also knowing where to go and the resources that they have available to them to help them through this process.
And Coach Ivy, how early should athletes start? Should this be from freshman year, like start thinking about plant the seeds? And as a coach, what can we also do as coaches to kind of incentivize, however early that may be, to continue to help our athletes realize they're student first? Because I know over the years we've even experienced athletes this their senior year, and it's like, oh yeah, I want to run in college. Well, where'd you apply? Well, it's the assumption that a lot of I'm guilty of it. Like coaches have, like they have it all together when it comes to that. And so, my first, like, how early should athletes start thinking about eligibility requirements, and then what can we as coaches do to ensure or just plant those seeds?
Yeah, so in a perfect world, and this is what we say, and we are working on, bridging the gap, but in a perfect world, we would love for student athletes because we have three different registration accounts. Our first one is a free profile page account. And so in a perfect world, we would love for student athletes as early as seventh or eighth grade to register with a free profile page account. And a lot of times we get like, oh, that's so early, but what they don't understand is that once they hit ninth grade, that's when their academic and athletic time clock starts. And so we have found that student athletes and families who know early on, this process is a lot easier for them because I have had families come to me distraught, crying because their student athlete is a senior and is academically ineligible and they're getting recruited by schools, but not knowing the different options. So as early as seventh or eighth grade, and even if you're on the fence, even if student athletes are on the fence of I really don't know if I want to play in college, I always say I would rather be prepared and not go play than be unprepared and then have the opportunity to go play and I can't. And
Mm-hmm.
so once they hit ninth grade, again, that's where their athletic and academic time clock starts. And so just being mindful of knowing who to talk to when you enter into high school. If you are a student athlete in high school and you haven't registered with the eligibility center, it's not too late. So, freshmen, sophomore, juniors, go ahead and, register. If you haven't gotten, started the recruiting process or maybe not getting actively recruited, that free profile page account, one, it's free. Two, it gives them their NCAA ID number, that's the number they'll give to college coaches when they start talking to those college coaches. That's the number they can put in their social media bio to let coaches know that, I am registered in some capacity with the eligibility center. And then as coaches, I know prior to my role here at the NCAA, I was not privy to all of this as well. Like I could vaguely remember
Mm-hmm.
the process when I went through it eons ago. Um, but one of my friends is an academic advisor at IU, and so I was talking to her about, it, and I was like, "Yeah, the clearinghouse." She was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Not called the
Yeah,
clearinghouse anymore; it's the
right.
eligibility center." And I'm like, "Man!" And so then, I really didn't know. I did talk to my student athletes about making sure that they're, taking care of business in the classroom, but I didn't know the actual details and I didn't know where to go to get those resources. There's a lot of resources online that have NCAA Eligibility Center resources. Their school counselors have those resources, but just coaches being sure, like, we have webinars
Mm-hmm.
specifically for coaches. We have webinars specifically for student athletes, webinars specifically for high school counselors and administrators that walk you through the process of that. I also say, from a coaching standpoint, one, encouraging them and making sure that they're, taking care of business in the classroom first and foremost. But two, having those conversations because not all high school student athletes go to the next level and compete, or not all student athletes know that they have that opportunity to do so. So I always, if I have a new student athlete that's maybe transferred or maybe they're in ninth grade, I ask them what their interests are. Like, are you interested in playing at the next level? And if it's yes, whether they have gone through the recruiting process or not, if the answer is yes, then okay, first you need to go talk to your school counselor and making sure and communicating that to them and then making sure that you're taking the right courses. And then on the recruiting side, on the athletic side, helping that student athlete know what their options are and being realistic about those options. So I know everybody wants to go Division 1, Power 5. or Power Four now, but that's not realistic. And so what I do personally with my student athletes is I have them list their top 3 to 5 schools that they're interested in. And then I will give them their best times, marks in the events that they compete in. Then we will go on the website of those schools they listed and we will compare.
Mm-hmm.
So student athletes who are currently competing at that university that you're interested in, from the best of the best all the way maybe to the walk-on. Those statistics, those marks, those results are online that they can find. And then we just sit down and we can compare. So then they get a realistic view of, okay, if your goal is to go to this college or university and compete, actually compete and, produce for this college or university, from given what you are running right now, and let's compare it to this, do you see that happening? And then just having those conversations. And if they can say like, maybe not, then we can say, okay, let's look at the next school, or let's look, instead of all these Power Four, Power Five schools, let's look at some mid-major Division 1 schools, or let's look at some Division 2 schools. Because when student athletes think of like Division 2 or Division 3, they're like, oh my goodness, like, no, that means I'm not good. That means we can't do that. And I just want that stigma to go away, because there are so many opportunities at Division 1, 2, and 3. I personally know, student athletes who have gone to Division 2 and 3 schools and gone professional in their sport. Just because you go to a Division 3 doesn't mean that it's not competitive. When I went to a Division 2 school, but a lot of the track meets outside of our conference meet, the majority of the track meets we competed in were Division 1
Mm-hmm.
track meets against Division 1 schools. So I just want them to be open, and us as coaches, especially, we have experienced the collegiate student athlete life. And so being able to have those conversations with them and just bring awareness, and also how, being open, not
Mm-hmm.
being closed off. If a college coach is interested in having a conversation just because they're from a Division 3 school, have that conversation, because you never know who they may know,
Right, right.
you
Yep.
know?
True.
So, as coaches, just, knowing who to direct them to if we don't have the answer. So if it's an academic question, knowing to direct them to their school counselor, or, doing a quick search to see, okay, they're asking about, academic requirements for the NCAA, just doing a quick, okay, let me see, NCAA academic requirements. We have an initial eligibility flyer that lays out all of the requirements to be eligible with Division 1, Division 2, and Division 3, and then sharing that with them, and just, being that support system in navigating that process.
I want to touch on this just a little bit. The NIL situation. A lot of kids are coming up with a lot of money and they're bouncing from school to school like within a year. How is that translating in terms of working towards a degree and eligibility and all of that? Like that's that, and then there are those kids who jump in the portal who are forever in the portal. So can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so one, first and foremost, the portal, like you said, there are some student athletes who go into the portal and they never come out. Or you have some student athletes who transfer schools, and the credits that they gained from the classes that they took at University A and they transfer to University B, some of those credits may not transfer to the new university. And so I always tell student athletes, one, doing your research first will help with that. Now, I know things may change, coaches may change. Maybe there is a student athlete who went to school far away from home, something happened, they want to be closer to home. Things do happen where you may have to transfer. But I think that if student athletes do their research before they commit to a school, and not just say like, oh, I'm just going there because my friend is going there, or, because a family member went there, or everybody's expecting me to go there. Does that school fit you as a student athlete? So doing your research, seeing like if you know what major you want to pursue, does that school have your major or minor? If not, why are we even entertaining it? When you are like, if things academically check your box and you're talking to a college coach, knowing what questions to ask to see if that program and that coach is a right fit for you. Because, sometimes you may think you want to go somewhere, and then you start seeing the plan of the coach that they have for you and it doesn't align with your plan, and you're like, maybe not. Or you might go on a visit to the school and you're like, I can't really see myself here. So one, just knowing what questions to ask. Do I want my family and friends to come see me compete often? If so, and I live in Indiana, going to a school in California may not be the best fit. Knowing how you are as a student, if I'm a better student in a smaller classroom setting, then I don't think going to a school that has a lecture hall with 400 to 500 students would be the best fit. If you know what degree you want to pursue, asking that coach when you're going through the recruiting process, am I able to pursue this degree, but also be a part of your program? Because there are some teams or coaches will say, I see you want to major in nursing. Well, a lot of their clinicals, a lot of their, classes interfere with our practice or interfere with our schedules. And so we, encourage you not to pursue that. So just knowing what you want as a student athlete first and foremost will help in that whole process. With the transfer portal, unfortunately, it is kind of hindering a lot of high school student athletes from getting recruited. Or, if you have like a mid-major Division I student athlete, they now might be getting more communication from Division II coaches because these coaches are recruiting out of the portal. And so from a high school student athlete standpoint, again, being open and understanding that, some of these colleges, unless you're like a 5-star, 4-star athlete, that okay, these Power 4 schools are going to be recruiting me, just knowing that there might be another option for you that is, not in your plan A. But the transfer portal, is there. So I tell student athletes, if you are at the collegiate level and you are competing, before you do decide to transfer, making sure that all your ducks are in a row, making sure that this new school you want to transfer to, are they going to accept those credits? And if so, how many?
Mhm.
Because that could impede on your progress towards degree. Do you think that you have, sometimes coaches maybe, like a student athlete will get in the portal and then a coach will say, okay, I want that student athlete. So, they get out the transfer portal, but there are some that are still sitting there to this day and don't
Wow.
have anywhere to go. So it's just, and then with NIL, that's a whole different beast. Now, NCAA student athletes can benefit from their name, image, and likeness. And so we do have at the NCAA, we have a new program called NIL Assist. And what that does is a platform for college and high school student athletes just to go on and understand how to navigate that space and what is all entailed in that. Because sometimes, I saw something on Twitter or X now that some student athletes didn't realize they had to pay taxes on their
Mm,
and so
mm,
we have, subject matter experts that have provided videos, have provided articles for student athletes and families to really look at to see how to navigate that space. There are, lots of resources on NIL Assist that help from, if you do have a collegiate student athlete saying, I got a chance to, go on an appearance. So I
mm,
have an opportunity to go on an appearance. This is my first time doing this, and they're asking me how much I should charge. I have no idea.
mm,
There is, a way on NIL Assist where you can see what other student athletes are charging and then kind of go from there. So it's a really good resource for student athletes and families, especially if you're not very aware of the NIL space. Now you have some high school student athletes that can benefit from name, image, and likeness. There are some states that have laws. Indiana is not one of them, but you have some states that have laws where high school student athletes can get NIL. But you want to make sure, even though that's a law in your state, you still want to do your research because you don't want to do anything that can impede on your collegiate eligibility.
mm.
Would that though? Like if they're doing it in college, how could it in terms of impeding on your eligibility?
So from a high school level, there could be, and I don't like NIL. This space is not my subject matter. But
Gotcha.
there are some degrees where, some things that a student athlete in high school could, accept and potentially hurt their collegiate eligibility. But we always say, if you are a high school student athlete in a state that allows NIL for high school student athletes, reaching out to their state's high school association, athletic association, to see what all I can do, what all I can benefit from as a high school student athlete in the NIL space.
You look, we about to have you doing workshops for
It's
athletes.
so
You
much that
already,
goes into this process and so much has
yes,
changed,
so
especially
much
like
has
we've all
changed.
competed. Like, I mean, now you have, like you said, the transfer portal. Like, you can have a student athlete here today, gone next year. And like there's some student athletes who are on their third school
Right.
collegiate.
Right.
Um, and so
Yeah.
just, knowing how to navigate that, and then knowing, they're probably getting advice and stuff from all over, and just knowing, I think having people in your corner who have your best interest is key as well.
Yeah, and I know I'm a little old school with that.
Yeah, I was going to say in another conversation we were having with another coach, it's like when we went to school, especially in track and field, that's where you gonna say whether track works out or not. And now,
Right.
even seeing track athletes and the evolution of that. So, for you, coach, from your perspective, how do you see how high school track and even college track has evolved? Um, in addition to NIL deals, but just in general, like it's different. Like leaving a school again, old school. You there, you stay. You get your degree. If you go further, great. If not, and so would you say that's a good or bad thing? And then just any other things that you've observed from your perspective that have kind of shifted.
Yeah, I will say the landscape has changed a lot. I always tell student athletes, like, one, you have to do what's best for you. So there are times where transferring is necessary. If it's impeding on your mental health, or, if you were promised one thing and you get to campus and, you know, whatever was said to get you here is thrown out the window. There are some good reasons why student athletes do transfer. But I will say that, just making sure, and I always go back to this, making sure that when you commit somewhere, that it's something and it's a place where that can grow you not only as an athlete, but just as a overall person.
Mhm.
So I always say if you are in a sport like track and field, who is, it's a multi-event sport with different coaches. Sometimes the coach that is recruiting you may be the head coach. So you might be a top recruiter and, they're going to send the big wigs to your house because they want, you to go to their school. So they're going to send the head coach, they rolling out the red carpet. But then you get to the school and that head coach, you
So,
barely see, or barely, because maybe that head coach is a throws coach and you're a,
right.
and so you and the sprint coach may be bumping heads, or you may not mesh well. So, going through the recruiting process, there's just so many things. I know the coaches are there to recruit the student athlete, but as a student athlete, you're there to also kind of recruit them as well. And as parents
Yeah.
and guardians, it's kind of like, you are entrusting somebody who's a stranger with your baby. So, making sure that all the questions are
Yes.
being asked and answered. So then, like, you can make that right decision for the student athlete. But I will say it the notoriety now and the attention that track and field has gotten, it makes me happy because, it's still, we still got some ways to go, but just given like the attention that's gotten since the Olympics, it's an amazing sport that I hope that will continue to grow and continue to gain that attention. But also, like you said, I've always believed that if I start something, I'm gonna finish it.
Mhm.
And like I said, everybody has their own reasons why they transfer, but I would like to see, even not just track and field, but even like basketball and football. Like, it's hard to, from a coaching standpoint, it's hard to, solidify or build a team when you have so much enter and exiting. It's kind of like that swivel door, like you in and out, in and out. So it's really hard from a coach's standpoint, to build that championship caliber team So it is interesting. It's very interesting to see, where just not track and field is going to go, but just all sports in general, with the current landscape. And again, it's always changing. So, 5 years from now, we
Mm.
don't know what it could look like.
Right. Well, it's like you said, where you have to be intentional about as much as the schools are recruiting you, you have to get beyond the flashing lights and
Yeah.
find out what it is that you really need for you to be successful. And again, we don't know if that would stop student athletes because it could be anything, but that is a lesson that I learned. And you pour that into your athletes, where it's just like just as much as they recruiting you, you want to know, is that coach saying, is this going to be the coach that is helping you? What academic support do they have? What is the success rate of the athletes graduating if they don't, go on? So things that even, I was only second year removed. So our parents still, we assume everyone knows. So just being mindful of those questions that we're not even thinking about. It's like, oh, my baby's going to college. So
Right.
just
And
being more.
sometimes, especially with like, you might come from a situation where they're throwing millions of dollars at you and you're just like, but asking those questions because sometimes NIL deals come with if you didn't go to class one day, you
Right.
may not be
Right.
getting that money. So, when student athletes are presented with an opportunity, just asking those questions, knowing what to look for before they sign contracts, even on NIL Assist, it gives sample contracts and what terms to look for and what those mean. So student athletes aren't, at some point, the ball stops dribbling, the
Mhm.
spike's got to come off, the football, at some point athletics stops. And
Mhm.
so how are you going to set yourself up for life after athletics? Not everybody goes professional. So whether it's after high school athletics, whether it's you get an opportunity to play collegiate athletics, whether it's after that, or you get the opportunity to play professional, at some point professional athletics ends. So how are you setting yourself up for life after athletics? You being an athlete is what you do, it's not who you are, and it doesn't identify you. And sometimes I think that student athletes get so caught up in that after it's over, they're like, okay, now what do I do?
Right.
You know,
Mhm.
like,
I,
who am
I
I?
would
You
I would
know?
agree 100%. Guilty. I was guilty of that. Like, dang, now what? I mean, I already had an idea. I was set up, but it was still like the reality that it was over. And
Right.
you're like, and even if you didn't want it to be like over, because
Mhm.
something may be hard to believe, but some people get to the point where I remember when I was a freshman, there was a guy who played football with me, and I was like, he was starting. I was like, hey, you trying to go to the league? He was like, hey, man, just keep it 100 with you. When you get to when you get here, you might be done. You might not want to be, it might not be a interest to continue this because
Right.
this is a different journey.
Right.
And when I got to his point, I felt his pain. I was like,
Exactly.
you
My
just,
coach, yeah, my college coach asked, like, after we were done, like, is going pro something of interest to you? And I'm like, no, because, back then, I mean, track isn't as lucrative as football, basketball, baseball, but it's gotten better. But
Mhm.
back then, I mean, you saw professional track and field athletes having full-time jobs and,
Yes.
mhm.
still having to navigate. And I was like, no, I'm good.
And that was the whole Home Depot big push.
Right.
Uh, uh,
They have more Olympians than anybody, I think.
right.
Yeah.
But
Right.
yeah. Well, Coach, we appreciate you joining us,
Yes.
sharing your wisdom. Whew.
Look, a lot of nuggets. I was taking notes
Go back
because
to
so
the
much has changed, like you said. So
A lot has.
it's really helpful how we can use the resources to empower our athletes and the parents as well. Yeah, it's exciting. We
we
need a
may have to
part two
do
for
this
yours
again.
too. Yeah, we need a part two for
I
sure.
know. We can talk about your coaching in part two.
Right, right.
Let me know. Yeah, just let me
Yes,
know.
yes,
All right.
yes.